Welcome, everybody, to the Cover 2 podcast this week. I am Nick Nenad.
I'm Jared Smith.
And today we are going to talk about what most people have been talking about the last few days and over the last few weeks, and that is the unfortunate circumstances of the George Floyd murder, as well as the civil unrest and the many protests that have happened. We will take as much of a sports angle as we can on this because we know you are viewing this as a sports show. But we did just want to give our comments out just because it's just, it's something on both of our minds. And so we just want to start our podcast by that. A little bit later, we will get into some major news with the NBA. They have decided to actually approve a format that happened just a while ago, right before we were recording. So we'll get to that a little bit later, but we want to use this podcast as our platform to kind of comment on some stuff like Drew Brees' comments, Colin Kaepernick's protest originally a couple of years ago, revisit that, and then also just give our comments overall on the entire situations surrounding the civil unrest and George Floyd's horrible murder that happened. So, Jared, I'll give you the floor first. Your just thoughts in the last week. How are you feeling? What is on your mind right now as we start this podcast this week?
Yeah, last night, this kind of all hit me very hard. Not to say that it did not when George Floyd was, killed and the first days of the protest happened, but for some reason last night, I literally got like a wave of emotions. And I think it was because I have multiple friends who have gone to protest here in Orange County, where we currently live. And I have seen too many videos of, if you want to call them extremists, if you want to call them people against the Black Lives Matter movement, whatever you want to say, that have tried to disturb the peaceful protests going on. There was a video where a guy was driving in the neighborhood that I grew up in, and he drove by protesters and yelled, I can't say it, but the N-word.
Yeah.
And I'm not naive. I know that in Orange County there is, racism, and it does exist. But a lot of people are showing their true colors right now. And it's just very disturbing to know that it's, now to see it here, because I've been very fortunate. I am, biracial. My dad is Black. My mom is white. But I've been very fortunate to where I haven't necessarily dealt firsthand with any racism. I know that I've been in certain situations, whether it's at a party or something like that, where I know that I just know that I've been around it, but not something face to face. But to see people in the community that I grew up in, which obviously is predominantly white, it's not a surprise. But I'm not proud to say that I'm from here. It's hurtful. It's shameful. Yesterday in Newport Beach, there was a protest, and there was a car that tried to drive through protesters, and luckily no one was injured. But I think disturbing is the word that keeps coming to my mind, and that now when I'm driving my car, or I'm walking down the street, or even the neighborhood that I live in now, I have thoughts in my head of where I'm looking at people differently. And it's not because I want to, it's because of everything that's going on today. So I think tying this all into last night, I kind of got hit with like a wave of emotions, as in, I don't want to believe this, right? You want to believe that people are good and people have good intentions. And I can even say that I was a little too naive, right? I'm giving too many people the benefit of the doubt. And so, it's been a lot. It's been definitely a struggle to see all this go on, and to see protests happen. And just yesterday, to finally see that the other 3 officers who were involved with the killing of George Floyd were finally arrested, because it's been now how long? And I mean, flip it the other way. If a black person had killed a white man, a white
Yeah.
officer, anyone else,
Hmm.
do you think that guy would be, or would be given, multiple days before they were arrested? And people were saying, oh, well, you have to do an investigation. That's fine. You can do an investigation. You can also arrest them immediately.
Sure.
They don't. Why do they get to go and sit in their homes and be with their families, and get a benefit of the doubt because they're officers? No, that's not okay with me. So there's a lot of layers to this situation. But I do want to get your thoughts on it as well, because you live in Orange County as well, and we both grew up basically in the same community. So I want to get your perspective on it, as a white man.
Yeah, well, similar to you, a couple of days ago, emotions kind of came over me. It was right in the middle of the protest, and you saw it just, obviously you what happened to George Floyd was horrendous, right? You hear him screaming. I really didn't even want to watch the video because you had heard that it happened, but it was so hard to watch something like that, just knowing there was no reason for that, right? The man is on the ground, right? He's not resisting arrest, and you have three cops with their knees in his back and his neck, which would potentially kill anybody. But besides that, it's been a really really weird time. I visited the one protest that happened in Huntington Beach. For less than an hour. I'm not going to say I went out there to protest. I went out there to document it for people that were asking me, that were saying, what's going on out there? Well, how's that, And man, the energy at those things, it's hard to explain. You almost feel violence in the air, and it had nothing to do with the police either. It was just people are so mad about what has happened. For 400 years, you go back to how whites have treated African Americans. It's awful, and for at least my perspective, it's been a ride for me because I've grown up primarily in the safest town in America, Mission Viejo, California. I lived in Irvine, California, which was also the safest city in America. I mean, it's been a different life for me compared to everybody that's out there protesting. When you talk about privilege, you're looking at, number one over here as far as what I've had in my life. But I look at it I went to Catholic school for 10 years. There was 3 black kids the entire 10 years I was there that was in the school. I didn't interact with black kids really until I started playing organized football, where I had a couple black kids on my team, but we'd go visit Inglewood. Entire team of black kids. I never judged anybody. I never saw them differently, but it definitely took me a while to even understand that, there was that many black people, just period. It was very weird when I look back on it, how little I interacted with African Americans. So, it's taken me a while to truly understand what African Americans have gone through. And I just think the last couple of years, with all these horrendous murders that have happened by police, by citizens that are white, it's just taken me aback, and it's made me truly understand that, I need to try to be part of the change. When I see racism, I can't just sit back and be like, I'm not racist, so I'm going to leave that. No, I want to confront it now. If my friends say racist things, whether it's just all white people or not, or it's just joking around, there has to be a level to it where I have to speak out too. And I can't just let it happen because of where I live and my privilege and all that stuff, and my little interaction with the African American community as just a white male here in Orange County. But it's been very strange the last couple of days. I'm currently in a relationship with a half African American girl. I've discussed with her, maybe some things, when I say things about, say, the protests and the looting and all that stuff, I say, does that offend you? Because am I saying the wrong? Am I talking about the wrong things here? Am I taking the wrong approach? And you know, she's been pretty positive about it and said that no, you're not taking the wrong approach, but you could say this differently, you could look at that differently, and I take that for what it is, and I analyze that, and I change, and I just truly think that what went on was really really good. Obviously, the looting and all that stuff and the property damage is terrible, but the protests around America, 50 states, that was amazing for me to see that every single state, whether it's a red state or a blue state, was out there fighting for the same thing. We've seen multiple countries come out that have nothing to do with this, have come out and you know, said this is the right way to go. So I'm extremely proud of of the United States, the way they've reacted to this. You know, I've just realized a lot of things after this, and I'm changed, and I'm going to be part of the change moving forward.
Yeah, that's that's what protesting, right? And
Yeah.
it opens people's minds to it. And listen, like you said, you admitted that you hadn't been around a lot of African Americans
No.
in your younger years, right? And how are you supposed to know until you know? I believe it was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar who yesterday was speaking, I believe, on ESPN's on SportsCenter, and he encouraged young kids, right? Who it didn't matter if you're white or black or what race you were, if you to go out and talk to someone who didn't look like you.
Yeah.
To get familiar with someone else, right? Because a lot of times you're a young kid and you kind of have your group, your niche, the people that you hang out with, right? He's basically saying get uncomfortable for a minute. Go see what it's like for someone else who doesn't look like you, or doesn't live in your shoes, or doesn't live in a house, or you know, I mean, or a big house like you, or you know what I mean. It's obviously everyone comes from different backgrounds, and it is healthy to have conversations and to understand where people come from, because a lot of times, and I've done it myself, where instead of listening and understanding, I just will say something, or I will just blurt something out, right? So I think this is a great slap in the face for a lot of people to take a step back, take 2 steps back, and listen, and at least try to understand where other people are coming from.
Yeah.
Right. At the very least, people can do that. The people that want to sit here and be bullish and just this is the way, or I don't understand. Well, okay, you don't understand. Are you willing to open up your mind to understand? Right. And I think that's a big part of it. So, you know, I think both of us just wanted to kind of share our thoughts on the situation, and you know, where we come from and all this, but we did want to get into some major news that does relate to the NFL, as far as everything that's going on, and that is the Saints, you know, face of the franchise, quarterback Drew Brees, who yesterday was being interviewed and made some statements that most people, you know, would probably say, you know, would probably agree with. But with everything that has gone on, with the killing of George Floyd, with the protests, and everything that has happened, Drew Brees' statements were just flat out insensitive and wrong. And he has now since backpedaled. And this morning, we're here on Thursday morning, has you know, apologized for those statements and tried to make up for it. But it's almost like a little too late in a sense. So. Nick, I don't know if you have, you know, maybe some of those statements up, if you maybe want to give a little excerpt of it, maybe not the whole thing, but just an idea for those who maybe have not heard what Drew Brees said, so that they can get an idea of what we're about to get into.
Yeah, well, and this just goes, it's interesting because when you look at this entire issue the last week and a half, you did, you know, based on social media, because you can talk to your friends and all that stuff, and they may not tell you the truth. But for some reason, you know, people on social media, there's still some people that don't understand, right? They don't understand certain areas of what the protests were about, and how African Americans are feeling. And that's including, you know, friends of mine. That's including professional athletes. It's including Drew Brees. So at the root of this entire these insensitive comments. Essentially, it's that at some point he said he never will agree with anybody disrespecting the flag. His exact quote here is, and this is Drew Brees saying this, is everything right with our country right now? No, it's not. We still have a long way to go, but I think what you do by standing there and showing respect to the flag with your hand over your heart it shows unity. It shows that we are all in this together. We can all do better, and that we are all part of the solution. But going back, and most of his apology as well kind of would go how you would expect it to go. But Jared, you brought up something right there just a second ago. You said it's a little too late, and the problem with the flag comments is it shows. Try and find the perfect word for this, but it shows a lack of understanding. That almost is the perfect way to put it. Where we go back to Colin Kaepernick and why he knelt for the flag. There are certain people that understand that, and there are certain people that don't. And those people that don't understand it need to understand it, because once you understand why Kaepernick kneeled for the flag, you'll look at a lot of other issues differently. So Drew Brees saying this, Jared, what were your thoughts? And obviously he has apologized, but at least for me, it kind of shows that it is still the way he thinks, right? He still realistically thinks of the flag in some ways a little more important than people's lives. That's at least how I saw anybody talking about the flag and how you shouldn't kneel and all that stuff. But what were your thoughts on this? Just Drew Brees and overall anybody still discussing the flag as an issue here and not the police brutality protests?
The biggest takeaway is it's been what, 4 years since Colin Kaepernick has basically been forced out of the league, and that is a whole separate conversation. And the entire time, from the moment the first time Colin Kaepernick took a knee during the national anthem, it was never about disrespecting the American flag or disrespecting the American people, right? It was standing up for injustices, right? And the fact that African Americans have for years, hundreds of years, not had the same opportunities, nor have they been treated the same as others. And the fact that Drew Brees, who lives in New Orleans, has played for the team for years, which is, there are predominantly a lot of black people that live there, right?
Yes,
he has a lot of black teammates, and for him to come out with that particular statement just showed that it showed one of two things. Either he truly does not understand, or he doesn't want to understand. He doesn't want to open his mind to the idea of why Colin Kaepernick really now. And let's take a step back for a minute.
Yeah.
It's not like Colin Kaepernick just said, he was sitting in his locker room before a game one day and was like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to kneel. That's what, that's what I feel, or that's just what I'm going to do. If we can go back and remember, he actually spoke with Nate Boyer, who was at one time an NFL player with the Seattle Seahawks, but he is actually former military, and I believe it's with the United States, or with the Army. And so Colin Kaepernick spoke with Nate Boyer as well as other military personnel to try to get an idea and understanding, how should I go about being able to explain why I'm upset, and they all collectively came up with an idea to kneel, right? You're doing it peacefully. You are not causing any physical harm to anyone. It was a way of protesting. And so now fast forward 4 years or however many years it's been, and how good does he look now? Right?
Yeah.
Because we look back at it and so many people were against him. And now you see protests and mainly looters and people who are trying to do the wrong thing. And it's like, wow, that kneeling wasn't such a bad idea, was it? Right?
No.
It got the message across, and it was not causing any damage or any physical harm to anyone. So like I said, getting back to Brees, for those comments, and also the second part of this is the fact that his own teammates came out and literally blasted him for it. Malcolm Jenkins, who has been at the forefront of the NFL as far as being proactive and one of the faces of wanting more African Americans to have prominent roles in the NFL, not just as players but as general managers and high profile positions within the NFL. His probably Drew Brees' greatest teammate, and Michael Thomas, one of the best receivers in the NFL, came out and had something to say about it. LeBron James came out and spoke against it. So when you have LeBron James, who is one of the most recognizable sports figures in the world, as well as your own teammates coming out against you, Drew Brees probably had to say, "Oh my gosh, what was I thinking?" The last thing I'll say before I get your comments on this is, it's nice that Brees came out with an "I'm sorry" statement, and he posted a picture on Instagram of two hands interlocked, a black hand and a white hand. In reality, doesn't mean much to me. I'm not really taking any of that to the bank, because at this point it's about actions and not words. And Drew Brees specifically talked about some actions that he would like to take and steps that he would like to do. I want to see those steps take place, right? I want to see him put himself out there and actually back up those words, because like I said, the statement that he put out this morning is an "I'm sorry" statement, and I'm sorry, but I don't totally buy it, nor do I really care. It's not about words anymore for anybody, not just Drew Brees, but particularly in this situation, that Instagram message doesn't mean a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, we obviously expected it to. It would have been very strange if Drew Brees would have just stuck to his comments with the person that he's been before these comments, a very respected NFL player, a beloved NFL player, almost a player that's almost impossible not to like, which was so surprising when we saw him say this yesterday. And I was scrolling through my Twitter and I'm like, wait a minute, what? You said that? Like, you don't understand with the platform that you have? He will be a Hall of Fame quarterback. He will be considered one of the best quarterbacks of all time. When you look at him, he'll probably end up being one of the premier quarterbacks that shows that your size doesn't even matter, right, in football, right, with the way he's played at the size he is at his position. But man, I just go back to it. He's misunderstood. He doesn't understand the issue at heart. Colin Kaepernick was never saying F the military, F this, F the America. No, he was saying, because of police brutality, I'm going to kneel to the United States flag, because what else is there to protest, right? If you're at an NFL game, really, what else is there to I guess you could protest the state flag, right? But you're not protesting the flag. You are kneeling during America's national anthem to prove a point that police brutality is not okay. And so for Drew Brees to not understand that now 3 or 4 years later, during the biggest uprising we've seen of the Black Lives Matter movement, it was just out of poor taste, absolutely. And I just think he needs to listen, like a lot of other people are doing here, and try to understand the issue. For someone, like I mentioned at the very, very beginning of this podcast, I've had to learn because of just my limited amount of exposure to Black culture at all, from where I live. Maybe it's similar to him. I find that hard to believe, living in Louisiana. I almost found it impossible to just be around all white people in Louisiana. But I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt and just say, hey, Drew, learn from this, come out and speak on what really is going on here. It has nothing to do with the flag. It's just a flag, right? And so it's about the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's about changing the racist ways of many white Americans and the racist ways of a lot of police forces. So I just hope that he understands, like someone like me, that just because we didn't grow up in this, just because of the color of our skin, does not mean that we can't understand what is going on, even if we haven't lived through it.
Well said.
Yeah. So also we've seen other comments. We saw, Vic Fangio come out. He's part of the Broncos organization as a coach. He came out and said that he hasn't seen racism in the NFL. Again, that has to be. When I saw his comments too, Jared, is I'll give you your thoughts on this because I know you definitely had some strong comments on this. I in some ways understood what he was talking about, but again, during this movement, that it's just not true, right? There clearly is racism, and when you just look at the Colin Kaepernick situation, that's racism in a lot of ways. That because he's protesting police brutality against African Americans, he then is blackballed from the NFL, right? So there's racism right there. So to say you've never seen racism is just ridiculous. So and there clearly has been racism before. We had the Mason Rudolph Myles Garrett situation last year where there was rumors that Mason Rudolph might have said the N-word during that exchange where Myles Garrett unfortunately hit him with a helmet in the head. Not condoning that that's okay for Myles Garrett to do that because of that. But again, to say there's no racism in it, I understood what he's saying because he said that, when I'm a coach looking at players, I don't see color. I just see a player and their skill. And there is a lot of truth to that. I don't think there's a lot of racist coaches out there. I don't think there's hardly any, if any, in the NFL. But Jared, I want to get your comments on it because it just doesn't sound good in this time, right?
Not only does it not sound good, this guy, I don't know how long that he's been a coach in the NFL, but you're a head coach of the Denver Broncos, right? The NFL, by the way, just players alone is 70% African American. Yes. 70%, yeah. Right? Now, when you want to talk about high profile positions, general manager positions, that goes down to less than 3%. You want to go to owners in the NFL, we both know that answer. That's zero. Yeah. As far as African Americans being in those positions, right? So you're going to sit here and tell me, and also this year, just like less than 2 months ago, when the NFL had to, in a sense, redo their entire Rooney Rule, right? Which is made to require teams to have to interview minority coaches before they make a final decision, right? When the NFL basically came out and admitted that was wrong, the way that it was set up, and that they needed to change their direction of the Rooney Rule, right? So the NFL came out and admitted it, that they did have a problem, but somehow Vic Fangio doesn't see a problem at all. It's baffling. I'm gonna tell you this: if I was a player of his right now, I would have a tough time playing for that coach. And I'm sure he's a great guy. And, he's a good coach. Obviously, he made it to up the ranks, and now he's a head coach. But I would have a very difficult time looking that man in the face and saying, "Hey, I'm going to go to war for you. I'm going to go on the field and fight for you." I don't even know the right word for it. It's plain stupid, right?
It is stupid. That's the word.
His eyes must be completely closed. His eyes must be completely closed. Because sure, as a white man like he is, yes, maybe from his perspective, maybe every team he's been with, maybe, he has not seen situations like that. But for him to say that just because maybe he's never seen it or he hasn't been around it, that's like saying, that racism is not prevalent here in America. Like, we've lived in Orange County.
Very
maybe
true.
We haven't been around it, or maybe we haven't been exposed to it. But that's like saying, oh, well, because we haven't been exposed to it, there's no racism here in America. Like that's kind of what he's saying.
Yeah.
And so for him to come out and say that on Tuesday, and then for Drew Brees to come out the very next day on Wednesday with his comments, the NFL is at a teetering point right now, and it is no secret that they have already had major problems. Like I said, when it comes to high profile positions and the lack of minorities in those positions, when you also have your players, active players being 70% African American, it's not a good look for the NFL, right? The NFL is in deep water right now, and they are having to backpedal very hard. So I I like I said, and the same thing with him. His I'm sorry, his, statements afterwards don't really mean a thing. They don't. I want to see actions now.
Yep.
I want to see these people getting involved and trying to better themselves, try to understand why people are so hurt, why people are protesting right now, why there are injustices, why there is still racism going on, and why it is reared its ugly head again, and it is now so prevalent, right? And people are showing their true colors, and that's what I want to see from people, is to open your minds and not be so stubborn and not be so damn stupid, to be blunt.
Yeah, and it just goes back to the people just don't understand. When I say people, I mean white people too, because I think most black people understand what's going on. A lot of other people of color have dealt with some sort of racism from white America. But yeah, when you look at these two guys who are both white, to me, it comes from a sense that they just don't understand. They haven't been exposed to it as much, and they're kind of looking the other way, which is again, something that I did unintentionally when I was a lot younger, and recently with the uprisings and just following the news a lot more and being in journalism for a couple of years. I understand now. I understand. Well, I still don't even. I still need to educate myself too. I don't want to come out here and just say I fully understand what's going on. No, I don't. But I'm educating myself, and I'm trying to learn, and I'm trying to understand as best as I can, because I'm not going to live in Compton in the streets, right? I'm not going to move to those areas, so I won't truly understand. I'm not going to move to a southern area, in Alabama, where racism is still extremely prevalent. But I'm going to try to understand what's going on. So I hope, like you're saying too, that Vic Fangio and Drew Brees can understand and educate themselves on the Black Lives Matter movement and overall just racism in general, because I'm kind of sick of white people coming out and trying to defend themselves in some ways, because clearly there's nothing to defend, just change, right? Like, stop racism. And like I've said in the past, I've looked the other way when I heard racist comments or racist jokes and stuff like that. So I'm going to not look the other way, because I don't want African Americans to feel uncomfortable. I think they need to make changes to the police force, clearly, at least change the way they treat people. I mean, I even saw there were a couple of police chases during the protests here in LA. And every single time the chase ended, yes, the person was going 120 miles an hour, putting everybody in danger. They got out of their car, they got on the ground, and for some reason, the cop still had to go knees first or head first and just slam the guy, right? And I'm like, the guy's giving himself up. You don't need to do that. Go over there and arrest him. He's not a threat. He doesn't have a weapon. What is the reason for that brutality, right? And I think it's a lot of cops showing their force because they're not trained correctly, or they've just seen things overall and they just, but that's not okay. That can't happen. And people shouldn't be scared of the police, and people shouldn't be scared because of their color of their skin. And I just think Drew Brees and Vic Fangio need to look at themselves in the mirror and understand, hey, just because I grew up a certain way, or just because I think a certain way, or just because my skin is this color, doesn't mean I have to look the other way, because I'm not persecuted and I don't see racism towards me, right? So, yeah, it's interesting times, Jared, and it's unfortunate that we keep having to have these conversations. It's unfortunate that a guy like Colin Kaepernick at least can't get a backup job in this league because of a protest that was proven correct again 2 or 3 years later. I almost think in some ways that because Colin Kaepernick's protest was so suppressed that this stuff has continued on, because we saw a year or two there, and correct me if I'm wrong here, where the police brutality against African Americans at least shuddered a tiny bit, right? And then for some reason, the last couple months and this year, we've seen some horrible incidents. We saw the man jogging. I don't know his name 100%, which I probably should know, but the man jogging that was killed by a couple of white guys for no reason, right? We saw Breonna Taylor in Louisville, and now we see George Floyd, all unjustly murdered because of the color of their skin.
Ahmaud Arbery.
Yeah, Ahmaud Arbery, exactly. We need to have his name heard right there. So, yeah, I just think everybody kind of needs to look in the mirror, especially if you're white, and kind of just try to understand how African Americans are feeling, or anybody that's being that feels racism towards them, how they feel.
Yeah, they do, and it's listen. I wanted to get on here and just talk about sports, right? Because there are things happening in the sports world, but I think it was our obligation to come on here and talk about what really matters. Because at the end of the day, sports does not matter when we have racism that is so prevalent going on.
Yeah.
And not just here in America, but across the world, right? And we have a president that says that we as Americans are looking foolish and other countries are laughing at us. Well, when we have other countries that, you see them protesting through their streets and marching and chanting and saying that we are with you, that doesn't look like laughing to me.
No,
that looks like they are with us, and they're doing, what others are doing. Because like you mentioned in the beginning, they are, whether they understand or whether they don't, they are, open to trying to understand. And, they are, trying to think of the right word, they're sympathetic to what is going on right? And I think that is also a major point, that we have a leader in office, and I do not want to get political, but we have a leader in office who does not seem to be sympathetic to African American lives or to the seriousness of the events that have taken place, which then led to these protests. And when you do not have the confidence of your own leader, where do you go? I encourage everyone to, if you don't follow The Rock on Instagram or any of his,
I was just going to say the same thing. Yeah.
To go and look him up and see his latest video that he posted. It was about 8 minutes long, and the title is "Where Are You?" And he's speaking directly to President Trump. And I thought it was very well said, well put together. I watched it last night, and so I recommend people to go and see that. And I know that Netflix is putting on certain documentaries, certain African American documentaries. Go read a book. If you don't like to read, listen to a podcast. Watch a documentary. Educate yourself if you're not, right. There's not an excuse, like you have said, to just sit on the sidelines anymore, right? For people who have, and even if you were doing it not because you meant to cause harm or anything, you were just afraid and you didn't want to get in the way. Well, now there's no room for sitting on the sidelines. There's no excuse for sitting on the sidelines. There are multiple opportunities for people to educate themselves on what's going on and try to better themselves so that they can understand what people are going through right now. And at the very least, right, lend a helping hand, right?
Yeah.
Or be a shoulder to cry on, or just be there, period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, you couldn't have said it better. The Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's comments, I saw it this morning. Perfect. And it's not really political either. It's just kind of humane, what he explains in his video. But go watch it. We're not going to do it justice. We're big fans of The Rock here. Obviously, you guys know what my other podcast is. I've been a big fan of The Rock for a long time. You don't have to be a fan of The Rock, though, to understand what he said earlier today. So, yeah, Jared, I'm glad we got to talk about this, too, because it's been, I wanted to use my platforms as a podcaster, too, to elegantly respond to what has gone on and not just send some brash tweet or comment on certain things and not. So if you've wondered why I've kind of stayed off social media a little bit, it's because I wanted to say it in a form like this where we can just discuss it with each other and give our full comments and not have a 240 character limit on what we can say, right? So I'm glad we had this discussion, and I hope people take away from this podcast that we're trying to make change here and that we are understanding of the issue, which I think we both absolutely do. But to To put an end to that and switch to our sports topic of the day. This just happened an hour ago, or like a couple hours before we started this podcast. We were not going to talk about this, but we have some movement in the NBA as far as a season restarting. So we want to get to that. The NBA has approved a 22-team format to restart this 2019-2020 season. It will happen in Orlando, Florida, at the Walt Disney World Resort, ESPN, all that stuff. Jared, your quick thoughts before I kind of get into the details of all this and I start explaining what's going on as far as what they've agreed to. Remember, they haven't agreed to safety protocols and all that stuff as far as the coronavirus goes, but we are going to have some sort of an NBA season, and it will involve 22 regular season teams.
Right. I'm excited is not a big enough word, right? Basketball is probably my second favorite sport after football. I know that you're obviously a big basketball fan too, and with everything going on with the coronavirus, with the killing of George Floyd and now these protests and everything that has happened, to have another sport, because the NHL was the one of the first main sports to come to an agreement as far as coming back and playing, and now the NBA has followed suit. It's like I'm ready to see a game today, right? And obviously that is unrealistic and not going to happen, and there are many logistics to still work through. But it's exciting that there is a light at the end of the tunnel as far as when sports will come back, and we will have basketball in some capacity, even if it's without fans, which more than likely it will be. But I'm excited because we now get to see somewhat of a finish to the season, right? I am just from a basketball standpoint, I'm a big Lakers fan. The Lakers were having one of the best seasons they've had in years, right? And they were the number one seed, clearly going to make the playoffs, and many people thought that they were going to, make it to the finals and have a legitimate shot at winning the championship. And now they get to go out and prove this, right? Obviously, hopefully, the players have been staying in shape. I believe it's been a few weeks now that team facilities have been reopened, and so not that they've been able to have full practices, but at least certain players at certain points have been able to get in and get workouts and that type of thing. So, I know you're going to run through some of the steps. But I mean, the first couple of things that come to my head is what day are they starting? How many teams? Where are they going to be play? I could probably sit here with a list about 50 questions, but let's just with the most important topics as far as how many teams are playing. Is it a tournament style? How is this going to be set up?
So, okay, I have as much as I possibly can. These are all from ESPN and Adrian Wojnarowski. And then when I go to the coronavirus, the rumored coronavirus protocols, that is Ramona Shelburne. So I just want to get that out of the way really quickly. These aren't our words. But yeah, so 22-team format. They will have an 8-game regular season to determine the standings. Now, this will affect some teams a lot, and this will also not really affect some teams. For example, the Lakers are, let's see, they are 5.5 games up on the Clippers with 8 games to go. So you can expect the Lakers almost to be the number 1 seed when the season starts, right? Barring some crazy collapse, which I doubt will happen. And then when we look, so I'll go over, it's 13 Western Conference teams and 9 Eastern Conference teams. So it's not 11 and 11. They did it so that we'd have the fairest, the fairest format here. They didn't do it by geography, which I think is fair because they're all playing in the same exact place. So why should geography matter in the first place? When you look at the teams that made it, obviously you can just go look at the NBA standings. The top 8 teams obviously made it. The Washington Wizards are the only team from the Eastern Conference that is not currently in a playoff spot that did make it. They are 5.5 games back of the Orlando Magic. But here's an interesting thing about the 8 and 9 seeds. And let me just read this perfectly. There will be a play-in tournament if the 9th seed finishes the regular season within 4 games of the 8th. I believe the 8th seed. I believe this has to do with the fact that there were more NBA games to be played, so it's kind of unfair necessarily if, let's say, the Wizards lost to I don't know, the Lakers, the Clippers, and all them, and then end up right. So if the ninth seed finishes the regular season within 4 games of the 8th, we will have a play-in tournament. The details of those I will get to in a second. I just want to go through all this. The Western Conference teams that made it to the playoffs that weren't currently in a playoff position right now are the Portland Trailblazers, New Orleans Pelicans, Sacramento Kings, San Antonio Spurs, and the Phoenix Suns. And again, this has to do with the fact that the Suns, who you're probably like, how the hell did they make the playoffs, right? They are only 6 games back of the Memphis Grizzlies. So again, if they end up 4 games back as the 9th seed of the 8th seed, they will have a chance to play into the playoffs, much like, for example, a wild card game, right, in the MLB. They have the extra team that necessarily, if they didn't lose to each other, and the NBA is trying to be as fair as possible with this. But yeah, so Jared, hearing that, what are your thoughts on all of these extra teams getting a chance, and the fact that we're not just jumping into a playoff tournament? We actually are going to, in a sense, finish the regular season here just with minimal amount of games.
Right. Well, first of all, I love the idea of having at least a few regular season games for these players to get their legs back. I mean, if obviously I want to see basketball, period. So if they did start with the playoffs, that would have to be it. But I mean, the first couple of games are probably going to be a little ugly. And it's not because players aren't used to playing with each other or they don't know the system. It's literally the fact of getting your legs back. And it's one thing to practice. And I'm sure a lot of players have, half court gyms or maybe even full court gyms in their homes or have access to a gym. But it's also another thing to play a full 48 minutes, or play an NBA game and going up and down and back and forth and all of that. So it will be I was actually talking to a basketball coach here in Orange County that said it takes only 3 days for a basketball player to lose his legs, in a sense, like lose his stamina.
Yeah.
And you take more than 3 days off of like conditioning, that on that 4th day, you're going to feel it. So not to say that players have taken 4 days off from training, but they've obviously taken more than 4 days off from playing a game. And so the whole just getting back into a rhythm, there's a lot of things that are involved in this. So I'm happy that we will have some regular season games, in a sense, preseason games for some, like the Lakers, who are obviously going to be in the playoffs. And so I think some teams are, in a great position, and other teams are getting screwed. Other teams, what about a back-to-back? Because if we do have this play-in tournament, there's going to be teams that are already in the playoffs that have made it, that are kind of sitting and waiting. And so do you have a back-to-back game, on back-to-back nights where you try to speed up the process? Yeah. Does that raise the level of concern for a potential positive test for coronavirus? What happens if a player gets tested for coronavirus? How long do they have to be quarantined? What I mean? I can literally just kind of snowball with all questions. We'll keep it as basic as we can. At the end of the day, I'm very excited. I'm happy that we're starting with regular season games. And like I said, I'm just happy that we will, at the end of all of this, have a champion. And so that we don't go, we don't look back 10 years later and say, oh man, in 2020, there's a blank spot because we didn't have a champion.
We've had that in other sports too. I believe it's either 94 or 95 baseball season. There was no winner, and Tony Gwynn was batting over 400, I believe, or was batting in the 390s at the time of the end of the season. So we potentially could have had Tony Gwynn have a 400 average during that season in total. So a lot went wrong in that one. Obviously, you don't want to see that. To answer your question about if a team already makes the playoffs, we are going to see that situation, Jared, because like I mentioned, the Lakers likely won't collapse and are already 6 games ahead of the Clippers. Milwaukee's almost 7 games ahead of the 2nd seed Toronto Raptors. So Milwaukee and the Lakers will be playing a lot of meaningless games. But I think when you look at this and you go, well, you need to get them to get their sea legs almost. They need to get their legs right under them. I don't think Milwaukee and the Lakers will have a problem with playing all 8 games. And I don't really see back-to-backs happening because the scheduling they're all going to be playing at the same facility. So it's almost like scheduling summer league games in a lot of ways, right? So there should be really no reason why this schedule shouldn't just be uniform, and there shouldn't be any scheduling snafus. Everybody should just have the same, even though, for example, like there's a lot of 6.5 games back. It's not going to matter. These teams just have to play it out and play the schedule how it was. So what's interesting too, Jared, is this is what I love. So just to show you how new this information came out, I just went back to the article to check the 8-9 seed little elimination tournament they're going to do. And there's now new information that I didn't see earlier. So I actually have brand new information I haven't even seen on the start of how this is all going to happen. Let me just explain the 8-9 play-in tournament. It's going to be 2 games, single elimination for the 8 seed, double elimination for the 9 seed. So really what that means is if the 8 seed wins 1 game out of the 2, for example, let's say it's Magic and Wizards, the Magic the 8 seed, the Wizards the 9 seed, the Magic would just have to win 1 out of the 2 games. The Wizards would have to win both to make the playoffs. Yeah. So it's not like the baseball wildcard game where it's just a 3-game series. No, the advantage is to the 8th seed, which I think rightfully so. If, one of the teams is 4 games back, I think, obviously if you can beat a team twice, nobody's really going to argue, right? And then to get to the start, teams will begin training in Orlando starting July 9th through the 11th, so about a month from now. And again, not all of this is for sure agreed upon too, but this is straight from an ESPN article, according to Adrian Wojnarowski. The league offered dates beyond July 31st to October 12th season window, and those were shot down. The NBA draft will happen on October 15th. The draft lottery will happen on August 25th. So we're just kind of extending the whole season out, and most league execs expect, like I just mentioned, that the season to start July 31st at the earliest. So you're looking at about a 3-week training camp for teams in Orlando, all in the same spot, and then the season going for about a 2.5-month span with the 8 games, and then the full normal playoffs that we normally have. So, and we could see changes. This is not all agreed upon. We're not starting the season right now.
Right.
And there are protocols, and you also talked about the coronavirus protocols. So this is according to Ramona Shelburne. This is just a couple of the things she mentioned will happen with the coronavirus testing as long as this stuff gets passed. Players and coaches will be allowed to golf or eat at outdoor restaurants, but they will need to maintain social distancing. Very interesting. The NBA will have uniform daily testing for the coronavirus within the Disney campus environment. If a player tests positive for the virus, the player would be removed from the team to quarantine and treated individually, and they would continue to test other team members as they play on. So a coronavirus positive test does not end the season for any team as far as this goes. And employees at the Disney resort will have to maintain similar protocols. For example, no staff will be allowed into players' rooms or the hallways. So everybody here is going to be tested and under the same guidelines pretty much. So the chances of the coronavirus really infecting this area is very, very small as long as players don't go rogue or staff don't go rogue and do something what would be deemed kind of illegal in this environment. So Jared, looks pretty good to me. What's your comments on all this? It sounds a lot similar to like what the UFC has been doing, and they have only had 1 positive test. And again, their 1 positive test, just to defend it a little bit, was from a man that was around a lot of positive tests and knew that going in too. So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. It sounds great, right? From the initial plans and the initial protocols, it does sound good. I'm always wary of, because it's almost inevitable that a player or a coach or someone in the organization will test positive. So when that happens, right, when things start to rattle or the wheels start to come off a little bit, how's the league going to handle it, right? And because like you mentioned, the league will not stop just because of a positive test. Well, I'm just, it's like a wait and see approach, and I'm excited, but also skeptical of, okay, when a positive test does happen, and it more than likely will, the chances of it are greater than not. What will the NBA do? What protocols will they have in place? It's also interesting. I pulled up, I believe, the same article that you're reading, and it says the Orlando Magic, will have to be in the bubble as well, even though they literally live a very short distance from Disney World, but they're still going to have to be in the bubble because the whole point
you have
is
to do that.
Right. Yeah. But it's an interesting question because they literally live right there, right? So, would they get to go home and sleep in their own beds and be with their family? That would be somewhat of a disadvantage because the other 21 teams would not be able to. So, and then, you bring up a good point as well. It's obviously everyone is there to play basketball, and, you're getting into the playoffs. And so you should have tunnel vision for that. But you also, players will need to, get out, and I'm sure they're going to want to, like you said, there's a lot of players. Steph Curry, I know that he loves golf, or go eat at a restaurant, or can they only eat inside the hotel or inside the arena, right? I mean, what protocols are there going to be? Can they go out on their own? Are they going to be restricted by a time limit? You can only be out for an hour, and then you have to report back to the arena, right? I mean, how much leeway is the league going to give these players? Because you mentioned it. If some of these players, to quote you, go rogue, right? Yeah. And it could obviously have a detrimental effect. And so I'm very optimistic. I'm excited, but I am also curious to see what happens if and when there is a positive test.
Yeah, and this article also does not outline if families are going to be allowed, if there's going to be fans as well. I mean, if you're playing in these small facilities, there's the chance you could test 100 fans that come in, and potentially, so I'm just spitballing that. That's not something they've talked about. I'm just thinking that in my head. If you only are going to allow, couple dozen people to watch the games, you could find a way to test people and allow people in, with the state of Florida being pretty open to a lot of things happening right now.
And also, I believe today the Texas governor came out and okayed for every sport in Texas, and I know it's not Florida, obviously, but in Texas, every sport can have up to now 50% of fans.
Are you serious?
So 50? Florida is obviously
wow,
very, very proactive with all this, and so maybe we potentially see fans at some point. Who knows?
Wow, that's truly amazing, Jerry. You know what that means, right? That means potentially 50,000 in Cowboys in AT&T Stadium for a Cowboys game.
Right.
Like that. I mean,
which is more than the StubHub where the Chargers have been playing the last 3 years.
Yeah, I know. I doubt California will allow fans no matter what happens. We know the way they've been acting about this whole thing.
Just had to throw a jab at the Chargers.
Yeah, well, yeah, I know, and they'll probably, you know what? I bet you they still won't have 50,000 fans in that new stadium too, just to throw another jab at them. We're NFC guys. We're gonna attack the AFC a little bit. Two other things. What was the other thing I wanted to mention here? Okay, the plan was approved by 29-1 vote. Nobody knows who the other team is as of right now that voted negative. I would assume it's one of the teams that got eliminated.
I was going to say, it had to have been a team that was eliminated.
And I'll tell you this, to just like conspiracy theory-wise, I would guess, let me just check this really quick here in the Western Conference. I would guess, excuse me, that happens every time as we have a little time limit on this thing. I would guess it's the Charlotte Hornets because technically they should have been eligible for the playoffs because they're only 7 games back, but they're the only team that didn't fit the mark. It would have been 23 teams. It would have been really difficult to figure that out. So, and the fact that, where the Hornets going to go 8-0 and end up being the 8th, you know what I'm saying? So that would be, at least I guess, the one team. Is everybody else technically was eliminated in this thing already. The Hornets are the only team that is technically in some ways getting screwed out of the playoffs, but maybe you should have played a little better in the regular season, right? Sorry, MJ, you got your documentary, you got famous again, your team doesn't make the playoffs, all right?
Sorry, dude.
It's probably Michael Jordan just being like, you know what, just vote no, right? It has to be him, right? He's like, we won't make the playoffs.
That's a good guess. I don't have a list of teams that aren't. I know the Warriors aren't, but the Warriors probably care less because they've won, 3 championships.
I think they just guaranteed the number 1 pick too, right? I mean, well, not guaranteed because they have a lottery, but 15-50, great season, Golden State, great season. But yeah, that's it for this podcast today. Obviously, Jared, I hope we can get back to sports next week fully, and we don't want to have to talk about this, in a negative way, right? We don't want to have to start every podcast trying to educate people on race relations. So I'm glad, though, Jared, we did get to discuss this today, because I think it's as valuable as us just discussing sports, giving our viewpoint, especially where we live, too. I think it's valuable for us to acknowledge that we are learning. You obviously have experienced some of it too, so yeah, I'm happy about this podcast today, and I was really excited to do this week, because I really wanted to get my voice out and explain how much I've changed, at least from all this, and just changed over the years because of all the terrible things that have happened.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you said it best as well. We could have very easily gone on Twitter or Instagram and, put out a statement. But you're right. When people are speaking directly, when you can physically see them, it's different. And now, like I've said, it's about actions. It's not about words anymore for anybody, right? For us as well. So it is an interesting time, and this will not be over next week when we record. So we more than likely will continue these discussions as new information, comes to light. Hopefully there's more information and we get more concrete details as to what the NBA is doing with the start of their season, potentially with the NHL. And we didn't get to get into it today, but it seems like Major League Baseball is going in the opposite direction and farther away than they were, last week, to coming to an agreement to actually play games. And so, yes, there is a lot of sports news to actually talk about, but it is important that we do talk about the social issues going on in our world right now, and that we continue to bring that to light and continue to share experiences and information.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The baseball, that is not looking good. And if you haven't seen our podcast last week, it still applies to what is still happening with the MLB. The MLB owners are threatening the shortest season possible for the least amount of pay. It's getting kind of ugly. It's not good to see as a baseball fan. I'm sure our boy Alex Silva, too, could attest to that as well. It's just, the MLB, it's not looking good. We'll educate you guys on that next week. The NHL just approved their playoff format as well, too. So, the ever-changing world of sports keeps changing here in the coronavirus times. And hopefully our society changes as well after the recent just events that have happened a week or two or a week and a half ago, unfortunately. But, for this podcast, this one is over. Once again, I am Nick Nenad.
I'm Jared Smith.
And we will see you guys next week.